All right, we're in the age of the customer. I think we all know that. We see headlines like this all the time. How many of you can recall an experience where you have become a loyal advocate of a company because the experience was so great? And the opposite, how many of you have had a really bad experience and said, I am never doing business with that company again? Okay, that is the power of customer experience. And actually, if you look at the data, Forrester Research, if you don't look at this report, you should, I'd recommend it. It's their CX index. They publish it on an annual basis, but basically they show who's doing really well in terms of CX and who's not doing so well. But you can see this is analysis of financial performance over the last 11 years of running this research report, and clearly CX leaders are outperforming even people who are providing great average experiences and less than average experiences. So we're at a place in the world of customer experience and how our customers engage with our products where creating great experiences is actually table stakes. Like you actually have to do this to get to the playing field. So actually been doing some independent research with UserTesting, and we've been looking at, of the brands that top lists like Forrester's CX Index and the NPS indices that are published, what are those companies doing that are so great? And what we found is that there are these really differentiated activities that these companies are providing that's really setting them apart from the competition. When we think about customer experience in general and how I like to define it, I think about it in kind of three ways. One is, can I do this thing? So can I order my coffee in the Starbucks app to go pick it up at a nearby coffee shop? The second part of customer experience is like, how easy was it for me to do that? Did I have to think really hard? Did I have to click around a lot? And then the third component is, how did it make me feel? And do I want to do it again? And what we've seen and what's being reported is that emotional connections and the way people feel about using your product or interacting with you as a company has a bigger influence on effectiveness and ease of use across the board. So as I mentioned in some of that independent research, I'm going to skip ahead a slide. We actually talked to consumers who were really loyal customers of about 11 different brands. And what we found is that those brands that have these loyal customers are doing exactly this. They're making an emotional connection with their customers. USAA is one company that's on this list. They're actually kind of the poster child for customer experience. This is a quote from somebody in our study. It feels like they're looking over my shoulder. This person in the study also told us that he called in to file a claim for an accident. His daughter was just in an accident, and the first thing that the agent asked him was, is your daughter okay? And he felt really connected to that brand at that point and actually moved a lot of his other services over to USAA after that single interaction. There's also Target. How many of you have gone into a Target with the goal of buying, I don't know, paper towels and have walked out with the $400 in your cart? Good, I'm glad I'm not alone. So this doesn't happen by accident. And actually the way the stores are designed and how they actually get you to explore. This is a quote from somebody in our research that we ran, where she talked about how it was like this serendipitous experience. It was like the excitement of being able to find something that she would want to purchase. This idea that she can walk through the aisles and pick up things that really interest her. So what's happening here is that the brands that are providing these emotional connections are actually the ones that are reaping the rewards. But as we start to have more and more interactions with our customers, in particular digital interactions, but not always just digital, in-store, kiosk interactions, we actually are starting to lose touch with the people that we're designing for, because we've built, as you can see on the slide, a little bit of a wall between us and our customers with the way that they interact with us. And what we found is that, this is an interesting study run by Capgemini, they asked business leaders, how many of you believe that you're providing customer-centric experiences? And 75% of leaders said, yep, we're doing that. You ask consumers, only 30% of them actually agree that companies are creating great experiences. And what we believe is happening here, and what's in between what companies believe and how consumers feel, is what we're calling an empathy gap. And the empathy gap really is a hard thing to close because you can't just look at data, you can't just look at analytics, you actually have to understand the humans that you're designing for and be able to use that information to make good business decisions. So a little bit of background on me, because you're probably like, who are you and why are you telling me this? So my career, I've been in the research and customer listening field for close to 2 decades now. Actually started my career at Forrester Research answering the phones for people who couldn't find content on the Forrester website or people who couldn't figure out how to log in. That actually really sparked my interest in terms of how do businesses actually listen to this feedback and make decisions on it. The woman who led the website for Forrester used to take me out to lunch on a monthly basis. This was before we had a great way of tracking the reasons why people called in. And she said, what are people calling about? What are the themes that you're hearing? I thought that was a really kind of scrappy way to provide or gather feedback at the time. I also spent close to 7 years at Nielsen Norman Group, really learning the rigor behind qualitative research. So those of you who see the studies that say, test with 5 people in an iterative design and then move on, gather that feedback, iterate and test again with 5 more people, that's the research that actually came out of NNG. And I've been at UserTesting for about 5 years now. In my role as Chief Insights Officer, I really it's a cross-functional role, but most of my time is spent with our customers, helping them implement programs for customer listening and building empathy across an organization. What we're finding is that as companies become more customer-centric, it becomes everyone's job to actually listen to the customer and design and make decisions based on what they're hearing from them. It's interesting because my degree is in cognitive psychology. And I felt like I had this little superpower when I came out of grad school. I'm like, okay, I can do a usability study, I can do a diary study or ethnographic study with the best of them. And it was like, I had this superpower that no one really knew about. And what's been incredible about this field is that it's now starting just to become something that you have to do. It's just part of what should be built into companies' DNAs. So it's been incredible to kind of watch the evolution of that field. But in terms of customer empathy and listening, I think we all kind of understand the importance of it at this point, and probably I'm not sharing anything completely new with you. But there's this notion of how do you actually do this in practice? That's actually one of the things that I get a lot from our customers is yeah, it sounds good. I know I need to listen to customers, but how do I actually do it? And the thing about listening to customers is it's the evolution. You have to start somewhere. It's definitely not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we work with companies that have very mature practices and those that are just starting. But when we think about design and development processes, how many of you use one of these frameworks that's on the slide? Design thinking, there's the IBM loop, there is a combination of agile design thinking and lean UX, and then there's the double diamond. There's many others. There's actually a really great Tumblr site called designeffingthinking.com, which has about I think there's thousands of iterations of these models that different companies have adopted that then go to share. Basically what I'm saying is that there's so many different ways to think about this and different frameworks. And when I work with our customers, I say, I think you can be agnostic in terms of which one you use, because really what I hate to see is teams get caught up in this idea of oh, we're in the define phase, so we have to do these 3 activities before we can move on. Really what I encourage teams to do is just think about your process in terms of being able to understand a problem, move into solutioning, and then create a design that's actually usable. And so I actually prefer this representation of the product design and development process. Anyone seen this? It's called the squiggle line. That's actually the official name of it. And it's meant to convey the feeling of design and development where you start with this kind of squirrely mess on the left-hand side, and then you move into more refined solution and a better design ultimately. But when I think about this phase, I really break it down into 3 different parts. And a lot of these themes you've heard today. And so what I want to show you is really some practical ways to actually engage in these activities. So understanding and defining. A few speakers today have talked about how this is the most important part of the design and development process in product design and development. I can't agree more. I see many companies not spending enough time here. Oftentimes we jump to conclusions, we think we know the customer, we think we know the problem, but really what we want to do in this instance and in this phase is remain curious. Actually was just with a customer a couple weeks ago, and they were telling me this story about how they're redesigning the share functionality within their application. And they were having all these internal circular conversations about what is the common behavior of sharing, and this is how I do it, this is the way customers do it, this is the way we should design it. And finally, the team was like, you know what? We need to just go talk to some people that aren't part of this organization and aren't part of sort of this circular thinking, if you will. And what they learned with 20 individual interviews after they built rapport with the participants and got them to really share was that guess who the most common person was that these people shared with? Themselves. Which is amazing to me. And people were actually a little bit embarrassed to even share that they were most commonly sharing with themselves. And that's the type of information that you really can't get. And if you're not talking to customers, if you're not talking outside of your organization. So that is one of the techniques that I recommend is what we call empathy interviews at UserTesting. So we actually did some research recently. We're looking at why people leave mobile carriers in particular. And so we actually asked people, we recruited for people who had just recently switched carriers, and we asked them about why. We didn't have a design to show them. We weren't asking them about a specific carrier. We were just trying to understand their behaviors. So I'm going to play this for you.
Reason I left BT was whenever I was trying to call them, it was leaving me on hold for a very long amount of time, which I would expect better from BT, to be honest. And you do get these messages saying that if you'd like them to call you back, to leave your number or answer yes. And I would do that. If I wanted to speak to somebody and I was on hold for, say, 20, 30 minutes, I would give up and leave a message for them to call me back, which never ever actually happened, which is really disappointing, as I would expect BT to have good customer service. It's one of the top providers.
So you can get a sense of the type of reasoning behind why she left BT, which was her specific carrier. And I think this is interesting because you can use that information to really understand, okay, where are the gaps? What's the problem we're going to solve? How do we even know what people want or what they need? This is the area of the design and development process where you're really trying to understand the problems that people have before they even actually know they're a problem. There's a quote from, I think it was Jeff Bezos in his shareholder letter this past year that basically said, if we would have asked customers if they wanted a speaker the size of a Pringles can that they could talk to on their kitchen counter, they probably would have said no. So the idea here is that you're really exploring spaces and trying to come up with solutions to problems that people haven't quite even identified yet. If you've been in the field of UX research or marketing or design for some time, there is this rule that you can't always trust what people say. You actually have to observe their behavior, and I am a strong believer in that. This is a perfect example, and I have endless examples of customer studies I've done where we've seen the same type of behavior. This is a survey run by the American Dental Association, said, how many of you plan to go to the dentist in the next year? And you can see the stat here. Most adults said, yeah, I plan on going. And at the end of the year, they looked back at the behavior and saw that just a small fraction of them actually went. And so that is really the importance, too, of being able to kind of walk in the shoes of your customers and see how they behave. Through the user testing platform, you can also do what we call virtual home visits. It doesn't always have to be the home, though. It could be an office environment. It could be where they're commuting. It could be within, their car, hopefully parked. It could be lots of different environments and contexts, but the important thing is that you're able to capture that. We actually did some research where we had people show us where they kept their connected devices. So I'll show you a clip here.
Okay, so here's the door to our apartment, and we actually put Alexa here on the counter. That way, whenever we come home, we can ask her questions, or before we leave, we can have her do things. And also she makes a great timer for the kitchen.
So there's context you can get there by just by watching and not just talking to people. So you see where it's placed, all the wires are everywhere. You're like, how does that even work? Why would you set it up that way? But remember, one of the rules of customer research is that you are not your user. And that's important to keep in mind when you're looking at and talking to customers. Okay, so in terms of understanding the problem space, really understanding what you're trying to solve, then you can start to ideate and think of ideas of how to actually solve the problem. And the important thing here, and actually this is another really important place where I don't see a lot of our customers spending enough time, and I always encourage them to spend more time exploring lots of different ideas. I think that was a theme I heard from another speaker. One of the great things about concept testing is this notion that you can get feedback on an idea without actually building anything. Like, you don't even have to build a line of code to be able to get feedback on something. We actually, again, doing some independent research on the streaming wars, if you will, there was actually an article in TechCrunch that announced a new streaming service through HBO. And we were interested in whether or not people found this idea compelling. And so we sent them to this article, we had them read it, and then we asked them, how valuable is this idea?
How valuable is this idea to you? Explain your answer. That's a really good question, because there is really a lot of streaming services coming out right now. The Disney, the Apple, we have Netflix, Hulu, you name it. I'm going to give this a little bit of a middle-of-the-road rating. I'm starting to feel a little bit of a streaming fatigue. Instead of subscribing to cable channels anymore, I find myself having to subscribe to 3, 4, 5 different streaming platforms.
So you can start to feel and sense kind of his take on introducing a new streaming service. What I love about this example is that it's not just the numeric rating that you're able to capture, but actually his reasoning. And that's where the value is. That's really where you get a ton of insight. And again, here, like, we didn't build a landing page, we could have. We didn't build any product. We actually just sent people to an idea and had them comment on it. So if you're using user testing or not, if you're using other ways of collecting customer insight, keep that in mind. You don't actually have to build anything to get feedback on an idea. And then once you move down you've decided there's a few different options that you're looking for or you're looking at, then you can start to get feedback on what people prefer, what's the right solution, what direction do we actually head in. And I would always encourage, and in many of these methods, not just using qualitative testing and listening to people talking and giving feedback, but also doing more quantitative type testing as well. Pairing the two, the numbers and the narrative, is really where the value is. All right, so the third most important part of the process is when you get into prototyping and testing. So keep in mind that prototypes can be, I think there was a speaker that mentioned paper prototypes, sketches drawn on napkins. Scan them in, and if you're not doing it in person, with user testing, you can scan those in, host them, send people to the link, and get feedback on the idea. We even have people doing more screenshots of prototypes, and then of course the clickable and more interactive prototypes like Envision. And the idea here, and the idea of prototype testing, is that you're not trying to understand the value, you're not trying to understand the market fit, you're not trying to understand preference, if people like this idea or not. You're actually just trying to figure out, do they know how to use it? Does it make sense? Can they interact with it? I think about this example sometimes. Because this actually drives home the point of prototype testing. It's about ease of use. When somebody walks up to this door, what are they going to do? Pretty confusing. And actually, for those of you who probably can all relate, or maybe it's a smaller percentage, but not every door is well designed. There have been a few where they've caused confusion for me. Do you remember that Far Side comic that was like, school for the gifted, and it was a pull door and the little kid was pushing? Like, for so long we blamed that on humans, like people not being smart enough to realize that, but actually it's the design and the ability to create something that people don't have to think before they use it. This is an Envision prototype of our study setup process. So we did a little eating our own dog food at user testing, where we try to understand whether or not the design actually works for people.
Screener questions down here. Okay, so
screener questions, 1, add to save screeners. So from right here, that's interesting. So normally it's a website flow, right? So I would be going down the thing and I would be like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And now it's the screener questions, but there's no like, let's create a new screener. I have to scroll up all the way to the top to find add a blank screener. And normally almost every study that I run has screeners. So I would expect that after I do all of this stuff, I would then be creating a screener. So it's weird to me that there's no like create screener button here. I would have to scroll all the way up to the top to hit add blank screener. That also worries me that normally I have 3 or 4 questions I might ask in the screeners. Does that mean that I have to scroll all the way up to add blank screener every time that I need to add the next screener question?
Good question. The answer was yes, and what we learned is that we needed to iterate on the design. And that is the idea of iterative design and prototyping, is that you can get feedback from usually between 3 to 5 people. You start to see trends, and you can iterate and redesign and get feedback again. I've seen teams go through cycles of 5 iterations in a week, a couple iterations in a day. I mean, it's possible to move really fast in this phase. So these are the 3 main phases that I wanted to talk about in terms of where to gather empathy. But there is also another phase that's really important, which is after you've launched and when you're optimizing. The reason why I don't have it in this graphic is because I actually think it's too late at that point. Doesn't mean it can't be valuable, but I really encourage companies to move this feedback gathering process earlier up in the design and development process. So monitor and optimizing, we have a lot of customers that live and die in these dashboards all day long. They're sitting in them, watching the conversions, watching where people drop, watching, you name it, whatever business metric is important. And my question to you is, let's say you're in this dashboard and you see conversion rates have dropped on a really important page. What do you do? How do you know what to do? How do you fix it? How do you make it better? I would hope that you would potentially put that designer experience in front of somebody and get them to actually use it and get feedback on it. This is an example of somebody trying to find a Lexus dealership in the Mountain View area.
Find the Lexus dealership closest to the following address: 2672 Bayshore Parkway, Suite 703, Mountain View, California. Move on to the next task when you're done. Okay, so 2672. So we're going to go 94043, 94043. Let me just double check that. 94043, yes. Okay, so I'm looking to see if that's it. It's not showing me the Lexus here. Okay, current model year. It's not even showing me that. Okay, 2019, that's fine. Rear-wheel drive. The Sport is 47. All-wheel drive is 43. That's fine. Okay, so I'd like to get to this one. I'm not even able to find the Lexus. Okay, so let's go back to just finding the Lexus dealership that's closest to me. Find the dealership. Okay, because this is so challenging. It's not as simple at all. Okay, I'm here. Okay, I guess because the page is still loading. But I'm here trying to find the Lexus dealership closest to me. Okay, so here we go. Gosh, this took a long time.
She does eventually find it. I think we all did a little cheer when she found it as well. But this is painful to watch. If you were responsible for this, just watching this one clip, you probably have ideas on how to make it better, how to optimize it, how to make it less confusing. Seems a little bit of a no-brainer, to be honest. Another interesting example, we actually were working with a customer and they were trying to understand why their kind of completion rate of people who could set up accounts with, like family accounts with their children in them. They were curious, like, why aren't people doing this? Like, they're starting the process and they're dropping off and they're not actually finishing it. And they were really looking at usability. There were no usability issues. And then they started actually like talking to people and really getting to understand how they felt about this this process. And what they learned from parents was that they were super concerned about what was going to happen to the data once they actually set up an account for their child. So what happens? How are you going to track this information? And there was no contextual content in the sign-up process, so there was no way for them to actually know. They also learned that people were more comfortable sharing an age versus an actual birth date. So these are all things that you uncover when you kind of put yourself in the shoes of the person who you're asking to interact with your product, to really understand what's the emotion, how can we understand what their concerns are, alleviate them, and ultimately get them to help us improve our business and improve our KPIs. So this is an empathy map. What's interesting about and what I've noticed about the world of usability testing, user testing, talking to customers on an ongoing basis is that it becomes more commonplace. People are doing it more frequently, but there isn't a great way to actually keep track of all this stuff that you're collecting over time. It almost becomes disposable, and that becomes really concerning for someone like me who thinks about how companies could be really learning about their customer over time and building this shared understanding and this knowledge of who the person is that they're designing for. So empathy maps are a really interesting way. I can encourage you to explore them a little bit. As you listen to customers, as you run usability tests, you start to develop and understand more of the emotions behind what drives people. So this isn't like a persona or like a market profile. This is actually more about how people think, what they say, how they feel, what they do. And it can really help you build up that customer intuition over time. I want to leave you with this quote because it's one of my favorites. There's this notion that, if we think about that dashboard I showed you, all the graphs and charts on it. It's really nice to have that information, but it's really not that actionable. And so, if you're not talking to customers today in terms of a more qualitative nature, I encourage you to try it. Do a couple interviews, make those empathy maps, really focus in on a single business metric that you want to influence. And I find that once teams actually start doing this, they usually realize that they can never go back to not listening to customers again. Right? Thank you so much.